There were only 21 persons allowed to be members of the press corps at any time. G2 was intelligence, we were G2D, which meant we were the press department of the intelligence department. Very well. So I was one of the lucky people. All the rest were important people like Irwin S. Cobb, Damon Runyon, William Allen White, George Petillo, William Slavens McNutt, Collier's, Saturday Evening Post. All these notable names were there. I happened to have a syndicate of smaller newspapers that got me in. Well, my experience was on a small newspaper, and I knew about what the press was up to and all like that. I wasn't taken in by the grandeur of the great names and the great people. Maybe that's one of the reasons why I'm telling you this story, perhaps. Well, anyway, I think I mentioned the fact that that on July the 18th, the American troops, led by the Marines, by the way, give them full credit, they're actually led by the 2nd Division, of which the Marines were only half, but the Marines got credit for everything, always do, you know. Smashed the Hindenburg line, and when we saw Hindenburg later, he admitted this was the decisive day of the war. The American, it was the first time our lines had been broken, and you can say that that was the American troops which won the war. I don't think he used the phrase won the war, but would change the tide of the war. That's the phrase he used. Very well. Flush called in Pershing and said, look, I have a brilliant idea. Why don't your fine American fresh troops, which have had this terrific victory, you see, they're now marching towards Germany, end the war by a wonderful pincher movement. This is the Saint-Mihiel salient, and he called it a dagger pointed at the heart of France. He says, why don't we attack at the two edges of the salient, see, and join our armies there, trap 100,000 Germans in Saint-Mihiel. You see, liberate Saint-Mihiel, the first town to be liberated after 4 years of war, and already trapped the German army, and immediately turn our troops, and he had a great idea for getting all the way to the Rhine. Well, Pershing was very pleased with it, and we all went and got ready. It took us till September about the 11th to get ready for this work. And then at a signal, either 4:30 or 5, in the book I say 5, we were all to go over the top on these two sides, cross no man's land, converge our armies, and trap the Germans and capture Saint-Mihiel. Well, there I was, you see, the youngest member of the army, by the way, of the press section. Let me see, in 1928, I was 28. In 1918, I was 28. Well, there we were in the trenches. This is not my first time. I've been in the Rainbow Division. I think I told you one day that my first night in the trenches, and it was a normal night where nothing happens, like in Westen nichts Neues, nothing happened, except that on the trench next to the one in which I was in, I was with the Ohio's, a shell happened to break through the cover, and there were 8 men in the dugout, officers and men. They were all killed. And just that shell fell 20 feet from our dugout. That's nothing happened that night, you see. But this was the greatest barrage we had ever put over, you see. And there I was, thinking I was a coward. My life, I've always thought, if I came to some physical decision, I might be a coward. I might run away. I might not face it. I've never had an experience like this. I mean, it's all right to steal pictures off the wall of somebody you're interviewing, you know, or the man who committed suicide in a newspaper or something like that. But this was a great test, you know. And so I was there. And I tell you that I think the main thing is mass psychology. I was there with all the doughboys. I mean, the whole Rainbow Division. I think we were all, in a way, I mean, they say the good soldier must feel fear. We were all trembling with fear, perhaps, but when the moment said go over the top, and you realize that for 4 years, anybody that showed a hand over the top, or let alone his head, got it blown off. We all jumped up and went over the top. And I felt no fear. I felt exhilaration instead. It was tremendous. And then our barrage stopped. And then the great surprise of my life, it was total silence. There was nothing there. After all these years, there was no reply from the Germans. There was nothing. There was no man's land. We walked wherever we wanted. We found the ruins of a plane that had been shot down earlier, an old tank turret shot out or something. We got to the German trenches. We admired how well they lived. They even had electric lights in their trenches. They lived well, you know, at least the officers did. And we went across, and nothing happened. So I said, well, you know, we were on the pictures. That was 20, you know, that was, if San Miguel was there, we were up 50 miles away or something, you see. So I said, this is no good. I'll never get there. And, of course, being one of the lucky people in the press section, I had a Cadillac. The one and only time in my life I ever did. I had a Cadillac and a sergeant who drove it and all that. That's what the 21 of us each ranked the Cadillac. And I went and got my driver, and I said, look, let's drive back and try to get into San Miguel. And then he was the brilliant man. He said, look, everybody's going to try to do it. Now, we know that all the roads are mined. And when they're not mined, there are tank traps. Now, look, here's what we will do. Let us drive around. We have the time. Let us drive around and make a detour and then come on San Miguel from another section north of the town, you see, where they never expected anybody to come from. And maybe they will get in there. And he drove around to a town called Chauvancourt, which was northwest. When we came to Chauvancourt, we found a trap in the town. The main road went through the town. The tank trap was a hole between the houses so that nobody could get through, but we were practically in San Miguel there. So we left the car on the other side of the tank trap. You see? We walked across. We walked on a side street where no car could, a little narrow street. We got to the river Meuse, or as General Pershing called it, the Muz. We got there, and there was San Miguel in front of us, and to our great surprise, we found French colonial work troops building a plank bridge into the town where the big bridge had been destroyed. And they were in sort of blue fatigue or whatever it was, so they had been there before us, and nevertheless, being the correspondents dressed in practically an officer's uniform, you know, we didn't have, those who did wore the whole Sam Browne belt, but those who felt queasy about it left off the shoulder strap, just a belt around here, but an officer's uniform. We got there, and they all thought, hurrah. They said, who are you? Are you Germans? You're wearing a brown uniform. We said, no, we're the Americans. Well, when they heard Americans, they gave us the grand ovation. And then we said, well, where are the Germans? They said, the Germans have been gone for almost 2 weeks. So here General Pershing and Foch and all our great intelligence had made this greatest attack with the greatest expenditure of ammunition we'd ever made, with tanks in preparation. I think that Patton's tanks were in the back of us, and all that. And there wasn't one German there. They had at least 10 days earlier pulled out, and there was nobody in San Miguel but the few French colonials building a bridge, which we crossed, and the whole town turned out in the center, you see, and gave us the reception. 2 hours later, General Pershing, who had got caught in one of those tank traps or, you know, or mines or something, eventually got there with the Secretary of War, Newton D. Baker, with General Pétain, who was the commander of that front, whom Foch sent. And Clemenceau was supposed to meet him there too, but he got lost, you know. And worst of all, the U.S. Signal Corps, which was supposed to take movies of the triumphal entry of San Miguel, never got there at all. So the photographs I took, these few stills on a little camera that I brought with me, I think it was about 2 inches by 3 inches, in plates, by the way, are the only historical evidence of Pershing walking across the plank 2 hours after I was there into the town. Well, you could never repeat this great celebration for Pershing, you see, which they gave us. However, the mayor and the chief of police and some of the people who had been in hiding and came from elsewhere, and there was a few speeches made at the city hall in honor. Well, I told them who Pershing was. They didn't even know his name. The Germans didn't tell them much about the American army being there. Well, the main point is this, that despite the fact that there was no capture, stunning capture, storming of San Miguel, I told you what there was there. We went to no man's land, nothing. And no triumphal entry, because certainly the edge had been taken off. The story was cabled to America. San Miguel captured, American troops, greatest victory in the whole war, General Pershing's triumphal entry in San Miguel. To this very day, it appears in books because a professor, I can't think of his name just now, but I have letters from him. As late as a year or two ago, a man wrote a history of the First World War or something, and which he uses a story, and I wrote to him, and he said, well, if it's ever a second edition, I shall certainly correct it, you see. I told him what happened, you see. Well, what happened also was this. I told you we were briefed as to how we were going to put over this terrific barrage, the greatest barrage of the war, and destroy everything in front of us, and then come out and then perhaps engage in hand-to-hand battle with the Germans after we had destroyed their trenches, and eventually march and join up the two American armies and trap them there. Well, we were briefed, and it was Fox Connor, I told you, the chief of operations, and General Nolan gave us the story. And he said, at so-and-so, at 4:30, the barrage will start. At 5 o'clock, we go over the top. At 5:15, we shall have reached this point. At 5:35. Well, among the bright boys of the press corps, Freddie Ferguson of the United Press did the very clever thing. You can't say it was a false story, because what he did was to take the briefing. At 4:30, we shall start the box barrage. All he did was, at 4:30, the barrage. Now, box barrages are small, but he meant the full length of the front barrage. At 4:30, the barrage will start. So he put down, at 4:30, we started the barrage. At 5 o'clock, all our men, the Rainbow, mentions them, you know, we were allowed to mention divisions at that day, went over the top, etc. He just put it that it had happened. Now, he didn't try to sneak it through or break the censorship. He went to the censor, whose name was Captain Gerald Morgan. And he said, Captain, the censor, he says, look, here is the story in what journalists call takes, in short pieces. Dated, you see, by hour, just as General Nolan said we were going to do it. When my men would be able to get back here, you see. Nobody's to write the story. Besides, I wouldn't have time. As headquarters announces our progress, you release these takes one by one. Naturally, headquarters announced the barrage, the jumping into no man's land, the advancing, and eventually General Pershing's triumphal entry into San Miguel. And one by one, Gerald Morgan, the censor, released Ferguson's dispatch, written in the past tense, of the glorious capture of San Miguel. And to this very day, this is the story that historians accept. And they will not accept the story of the one person who was there, who says there was no capture, there was no storming, there was no glorious entry, etc., etc.
Pershing himself further added insult to the truth by perhaps shading in this issue of the capture of German troops. Would you tell that part of it?
That is an interesting thing that happened. You don't expect, now look, what you do not expect is that the American Army official communique with saying, we entered San Miguel today and found that the Germans had left it at least 10 days ago, that the orders to withdraw had been issued 2 weeks earlier. Now, you don't expect us to admit that ever, see, but that's exactly what happened.